Good morning. It's an absolute honour to be here, so I'm very, very thrilled to have been asked. I think my job has just been made easy, or easier, because there were two things that I picked up from what Alberto said. One was about making business more humanised, and the other word that I picked up was inspiring, about how we can inspire each other to be courageous. And hopefully, I'm going to pick up on some of those themes. Okay, back to the future. It seems to me that in all of the upheaval, in all of the turmoil, in all of the opportunity, and in all of the threat that we face in business today from many, many directions, that in fact there is a legacy of learning that I believe that we're overlooking, and it's up to us if we want to overlook it. That's our prerogative. That's our choice. However, if we want to just stop, do what Alberto said, take time out, have a reflection, have a think, we'll find that things that happened 30 years ago remain absolutely relevant. And that's my proposal to you. So let's see if you agree with me. There we are. So what I'm going to do for the time that we have together this morning, I'd like to break down the time that I have into four main themes. Firstly, to look at this business process management and really to tell you my interpretation of business processes, and then we can talk about management, because I think the two things are related. So for me, I don't think we can talk about BPM until I can tell you what I think about business process management. Then we get to the meat of why we're looking backwards, because I believe that process-based philosophies, lean, agile, quality, all these things that we know of from so long ago, that the elements, the essence of what we need to go forward together is actually hidden within those approaches, those philosophies, if you like. And actually that word philosophy is very, very important. It's not a set of methods, it's a philosophy that underpins and is sewn into everything that the business does. Okay, and then picking up on some of the barriers, which in fact Alberto started to unpick. If I just have a look at a few of them, and really what I want to do is focus on theme four. Theme four being about creating the future. How do we do it in the face of all this obstruction, in the face of all this, the problems that Alberto alluded to? How do we move forward? And I have some suggestions, and they're nothing more than suggestions, but I hope they're a conversation that we can carry on. Okay. My view of business processes, and this is my view from having worked over about 20 years with businesses and people, executives, managers at senior and executive level, who were taking their businesses in new directions. To me, a business process is nothing more than, it's the outcome of what we all do together. Sure, we have analytics, we have business decision technologies and methods, but in fact, what matters in the end is what we do together to either make things happen, or more frequently, or sometimes, to stop things from happening. Okay, so that's my view of a business process. This is interesting because I get a lot of my learning now online. I don't know how many of you are active on Twitter or any of the other social media, but this is my major source of learning. And someone only recently pointed me to a lecture that Karl Popper, the philosopher, and he was looking at determinism, free will and all that sort of stuff. But anyway, he picked up on two metaphors, and these metaphors were clocks and clouds. And it seems to me that when you think about organizations, looking back at how management methods have evolved, that in fact so much effort has been put into trying to control people, to trying to control their behaviour. Now the research is clear on that, and the havoc that is wreaked by that is overlooked. Now I don't understand why, but that's the fact. So if you look at an organisation and a metaphor, I think we've tended to look at organisations as clocks, regular, predictable, and so forth. And in fact, what they are is cloud-like. They're unpredictable, you don't know what's going to happen, it's people, we're messy, it just is. And so I think this is the nub of what's happened in the past. One piece of research, I don't know about you, but I go back to maybe about half a dozen sources, and this is one of mine. This is a piece of research that was done about, 15 years ago now. And I haven't seen anything to refute it. And Andrew Pettigrew and Evelyn Fenton, they published this book called The Innovating Organisation. And in The Innovating Organisation, they came out with a couple of tentative conclusions at the end about what makes an organisation innovating. And one of the things they said was that innovating organisations, in all the mess and all the confusion, are able, they're able to negotiate dualisms, paradoxes, so control and autonomy, hierarchy and network, clock and cloud. So I'm not dismissing methods and decision-making tools, but the one thing that I do think that we haven't really got our heads around is human relationships and how we behave together. Okay, so I think that now business processes, as in what we do together, have become immeasurably more complex. So in a factory, you can see outputs going through, you can count it. The world that we're moving into, where processes are hidden within our heads, in the abstract ideas that we have, and how these abstract ideas are brought out are in the conversations that we have with each other. So that we now have processes that are hidden, that are distributed. They're distributed globally, they're distributed across boundaries, they're distributed across organizational units, across companies, supply chains, and they're distributed across national, professional, and organizational boundaries. And I think that the one lesson, or one of the lessons that we can, looking back at the future, is that we need to break out of our professional boundaries. We need to break out of our silos. We need to start to talk to each other. We need to start to learn each other's language. There we are. So that's my view of business processes, and we really are facing enormous complexity. Okay, very quickly on this. It seems to me that when we look at these process-based philosophies, and one of the things, the advantage in looking backwards is that we can see how these evolved, we can see how they matured, and at the time when I was researching them, I started 20 years ago, there was a lot of criticism from the academic community, and it's very interesting to me that one of the vocal critics at that time, 10 years later, was talking about evidence for a learning factory. So this is why I'm saying that when we look back, the key features for me are, I've got a pointer here, all right, customer focus. And the customer focus is not only outside into your external customers, but everyone inside being encouraged to treat each other as customers and supplying services to each other. That was a key element. Okay. Innovation, everybody involved, nobody excluded, absolutely inclusive. And here we go, we've got the cross-boundary again. So if that was 30 years ago, the situation now is that with bells on, It's, and this is the one thing that I think is really overlooked. That social relationships, all the work that I ever did on factory floors, it was how people influenced each other. If people weren't happy or were unsure about continuous improvement or about quality or whatever people were being asked to do, it was people on the shop floor who persuaded each other. So social relationships throughout the organisation were critical. Then we have enablers. This is a real simplification, but these are the things that we already know work. So we have organizational leadership. We'll be talking about leadership later on, and the performance enablers like the tools and technologies that we know that we have available to us. This is all known. However, the one thing or one of the main things that we can learn looking backwards is just how hard this was, just how difficult. And that's not me. I can find out the reference where that came from, and I'll put this into the paper. Is that 10 minutes? Okay, brilliant. Many businesses failed their way to success. This is no easy straight line. We need to get there because it's people, because this is hard. Success is not guaranteed. That's what I'd like to say. So I don't, this isn't meant to frighten anyone because we all know this. I'm speaking to an audience of experts, and I'm not telling you anything that you don't already know. So this is just a bit of a reminder, in a sense, to say, well, this is what I think, so that when we come to look at how do we actually move forward, the reminder is that we all know that this is no walk in the park. We know it. So let's have a look at some of the barriers. I think Alberto very eloquently started to unpick them. But here is my top 3 or 4. Now the examples that I've given here are all historic. But for me, they're ones that I like because they're like, wow, massive. Okay, now this example here doesn't come from any business book or anything. I was reading a book a wee while back by a guy, John Farmer. And John Farmer was the senior counsel investigating the 9/11 atrocity and afterwards. And then what he, later years, information that had been declassified, he felt put a new light on events. As I was reading through it, what absolutely jumped out at me was the organisational issues. One, there was the mindset of still fighting an old war, and this new world hadn't properly or adequately been thought about. But this is what he said. He said that when you look at how the FBI and the CIA and the Department of Defense worked together, what he actually pulled out was the fact that it was the system. The fact that each boundary amounted to a fault line. To me, that's amazing. So that's why boundaries are really critical, and that's why you're coming back to humanising and the skills that we have to learn. One of the skills is, how do we talk across our boundaries? How do we start to learn each other's language? How do we start to see things from not only our own perspective, but from others? And as I say, this means something to me, because I think, well, if that can happen in the defence of a nation, it most certainly can happen in the pursuit of business. So that's my first example. So the pull of the status quo. The status quo, don't underestimate it. The way things currently are done. I'm not telling you anything you don't already know. Forgive me if you think this is simplistic. It's just the way it is. All right, second one, I think this is great. Again, this goes back to 2009, and it's when General Motors filed for bankruptcy, Chapter 11. And this is Gary Hamel. This is a Gary Hamel quote, who suggested that, in fact, they walked into committing suicide by degrees. In other words, what he's saying is that this is long. It didn't just happen. General Motors knew that they were in trouble. Actually, I remember reading, is it The Fifth Discipline? Oh, who wrote that? Anyway, it doesn't matter. And at that time, then, in 1993, the edition that I was reading, even then, General Motors was being pulled out as an example of a company who couldn't understand that things were changing, or if they did, had the inability to move forward into the new world that was developing. So, yeah, Hamel reckons that they meandered into mediocrity, one short, small-sighted step at a time. I think that's great. Okay, failure happened over a period. Oh, all right, let's get on. Right, here's the big one now, and I think this is where we come up to date. Complexity. The complexity that we're facing is escalating, and it's coming from technical, organizational, and social origins. Now, this is Toyota. And again, going back to 2009, Toyota being the big example of quality. I don't know if you remember the overwhelming recalls at the time. And looking backwards, what they were trying to say was, why this failure? There was sudden acceleration. What's going on? And the experts at the time said, actually, new materials, electronics into automotive, these are things that are just, we don't know how they're going to behave. It's unexpected and unpredictable. So interconnections, uncertainty, it's complexity. All right, let's move on. Knowledge complexity. Here's another one. This is GSK. This is Andrew Whitty, who's the chief executive of GSK, and it's a BBC podcast. Peter Day. I think I've put the reference there. It's worth a listen. And Andrew Whitty says that drug discovery is more complex than putting a man on the moon, and that in fact it's intensely human. We're back to Alberto's humanizing business processes, and this program talks about how they had a big research and development facility in the UK. I think it was in Stevenage. Total failure, absolute failure, because they had the scientists all working in their silos. And what they decided to do was to then say, right, we're going to get rid of that structure. We're going to have people together working on the benches. We're going to have clinicians talking to mathematicians, and everybody working things out as they go along. Now, you'd have thought that was obvious, but obviously it wasn't, because they spent so much money in putting experts into their silos. And this brings me back to my point of we have to learn to break out and learn to speak each other's language. I was at another conference. This was about, a long time ago, 15 years ago. And I was talking to a chief executive of a pharma company, and he said, Anne-Marie, I'll tell you what my problem is. I said, okay then. He said, I cannot get my scientists to speak to each other. They will not talk in each other's language. He said, this is my biggest problem. Not technical, it's just that they cannot speak each other's language. All right then, so I think I've laid it on thick. We're moving into the bit that really interests me. But the other barrier that we have is aversion to risk. Now, this person said this in 2008, and at the time he was a senior executive with RIM, maker of the BlackBerry, and HR is about what we shouldn't do, communications about what we shouldn't say, finance, we shouldn't spend it, we shouldn't. The risk aversion. Now, again, we're back to balance, because risk, it's there, it has to be managed, it has to be recognised, but to the point where you do nothing, and we all know what happened to research in motion. We're risk managing ourselves to death. Okay, so I've laid it on thick. This is the bit that I really want to talk about now. About how do we actually overcome some of these barriers? How do we start to chip away at the foundations? How do we start to, while recognising the difficulties, not being overwhelmed by them? How do we begin? That's what I want to say. The book that I had published, Smart Working, Creating the Next Wave, one of the lessons, looking back to the future and all my time working on shop floors, and actually not just in shop floors, later on working internationally, working with senior executives, the one thing that became clear to me is that there are determined individuals, there are determined people throughout organisations, and that's from the shop floor upwards. And these people just are so sick and fed up of the status quo. They're so sick and fed up of the fact that things are dysfunctional, and they take it upon themselves to start to do something about it. And it's not easy, but it can be done. All right? And I've seen examples of it. I've got one tiny personal example of it. And my little sister is a nurse. She's a senior nurse in a hospital in Scotland. And when she took over this role about 5 or 6 years ago, it was chaotic. And she thought, I'm not having this. I'm just not putting up with it. And she set about changing the performance culture on her ward. And it was a struggle, but she did it. And I'm very happy to talk to you afterwards about how she did it. She didn't do it on her own. She had an ally. And so the conditions were right for her to do it. So this is what I want to suggest. I think that one of the things that I saw from all my work on shop floors in particular is just this success came with a really passionate person who's had enough and he's just going to do something about it, or she's just going to do something about it. And they set about, for their own sanity, actually, as much as anything else, about changing things. Okay. We're back to research in motion. So if we think back to the slide about risk aversion, I was at another conference where I heard Jim Balsillie, or one of the two CEOs of RIM. And he was talking about how business was like whitewater rafting. And that it was about navigating cascading circumstances and minute-to-minute continuous optimizations. The point he very vividly said, now this is before RIM got into trouble. Okay, what he said was that he felt like, everyone's in a boat and nobody's navigating really, they're pointing in a particular direction. You're all just trying to keep the boat upright. And while you're doing that, you're keeping an eye out for the rock that's just coming at you. That was RIM before they hit the rocks. And I'm not suggesting that this is in any way a criticism. I'm just suggesting that this is, the situation that many of us are facing. So how do we actually go about making any sort of dent in these circumstances? And we can. Right, this is a quote from, I've got the reference down here, Dr. Atul Gawande. He's a medical doctor, and he's written, I think he wrote a book about lists, and how, experts, if they have a list to follow, they're perhaps less likely to go off rail. But he wrote this article about why it was that some innovations took a long time to take off. I think he was looking at anesthesia versus, germs. And anesthesia took off very, very quickly, whereas, knowledge about hygiene took much longer. So he was talking about that. But in essence, what he was talking about was childbirth. He was saying that there were very simple processes and procedures that could save lives, and they were being overlooked. And his conclusion was that dissemination of new ideas is a social process. We're back to talking to each other. That's it. We're back to learning how to step into each other's shoes and to see things from someone else's point of view. That's one of the first things that we can do to start creating the future. It sounds simple, but actually it's not. And I think social technologies, I come back to it. My hope for social technologies when I first came across them about 10 years ago, I've got questions over them now. But however, I learn so much from talking to people. I learn so much from the things that they share and from the things that I share. So I would suggest to you that as we move into the future, to create this future, that we start to talk to each other, either in person at a conference like this, or we go online and start to find out who's saying what, who's doing what can we learn from one another. Dissemination is a social process. There we go. Discover who knows what, tools and methods. The tools and methods are there. How are we applying them? What were the lessons? What were the problems? What worked? What didn't work? What can we learn from each other? I keep coming back to this. It sounds so simple. It's about talking to each other. It's about listening. hearing one another and learning each other's languages. Actually, this is interesting, this source here, Fishbein and Treverton. If we go back to John Farmer, who talked about the CIA and the FBI and so forth, these people here are from the CIA. And what they said was that recognizing what had happened, that moving forward, they were looking at what were the techniques, what were the sense-making, the scenarios, what tools could we pick up so that we could start to be very agile and in the moment and challenge what we know. So that's well worthwhile. How am I doing for time? I think I'm okay. All right, I'm almost there. Right, experiment. This is really where I'm at the moment. This is, in my practice, this is where I'm at. So creating the future, find a little small thing. John Hagel and, I can't remember, his co-authors wrote a book a couple of years ago called The Power of Pull. And what they're suggesting, small moves smartly made, find something little, find something that you can do together. And if it fails, you know, you've learned something. It's not a disaster. Peter Fry, the paper that I will write for you afterwards, you'll find all the references to who these are. A guy called Peter Fry in the UK talks about Trojan mice. I love that. I used to think that a Trojan mice was a person. It's not. It's a little small thing. It's a wee thing that you can do, and you bring it in underneath the wire, and it starts to change the culture, it starts to change things. So, and Dave Snowden, I don't know how many of you know Dave Snowden, his Kinefin framework for complexity I would recommend finding out some more about it. He talks about safe-to-fail probes. It's all the same thing. Find something small, do it again, do it again, do it again. Encourage other people to do it. And the next thing you know, that you've kicked off change from the outside in and from the bottom up. Going back to the future, going back 30 years ago, the idea that learning and innovation was just everyone's business. It wasn't, you know, it wasn't the consultants that got brought in. It was everyone, and everyone's expectation was that, you know, you were measured on it, you were evaluated on it. We can't lose sight of that. We really can't lose sight of that. Okay, here's the hard one, and it is challenging the status quo. There's a brilliant TED talk. I'll find the reference for you, Margaret Heffernan. And it's called Dare to Disagree. And it is absolutely fantastic. And what she talks about is people getting into partnership. You know, people with different views, and they trust each other to challenge each other, to pick each other's work apart, not destructively, but always to be pushing, helping people not to get into the mindset of, we did it this way and that's the way we're always going to do it. So Margaret Heffernan's Dare to Disagree, it's a high recommendation. This is the work that I'm doing with, and it's the work that I've been doing for quite a while now with senior people, you know, challenging them to find something that they want to do, scoping a program of work, and through that, practicing and learning the skills that they're going to need to know. There we are, the question assumptions. I can't stress enough that none of this is easy, but it is possible. It's the only way, in fact. And creative conflict. All right, then when does conflict become destructive? And when is it creative? A question that I throw out to you. You know, I'm still struggling with that one. But moving forward requires, like, the grit and the peril, that we start to push against each other, you know, challenge each other. We had conversations at dinner last night, you know, where we were saying, you know, challenging each other, and it's energetic. It is, and it shifts our mindsets away from being stuck. Okay, right, this is what I'm working on at the moment. I can talk to you about it later on, but essentially what I've done is to go back over, all the lessons that I think are worth pulling out of our experience from so long ago. And I'm putting together a diagnostic. It's a set of questions, and this is actually in prototype at the moment. But essentially, a set of questions around purpose. What do people expect? What do customers expect around people? What do people need from work? Processes. Now, for me, this is about setting the conditions. What are the roles? What are the rules? How do we specify them? How do we not? How do we let people do what they need to do? Give them all the freedom that they need, and yet at the same time, what are the essential rules that they have to adhere to, and how do you enforce them? Okay, there's a lot in there, but this is in fact what I'm working on at the moment. It's just something that I can go in with people and say, I'm sure you know all these things, but here are some prompt questions around these core themes, which are all about business processes. And the other thing that I've done as well is I went back through, all the literature that I knew about, and I discovered, well, not discovered, for me, I saw 10 patterns, 10 high-performance patterns. So what do they mean? What do they mean in practice? What do they mean in your particular context? And really, this, for me, is only about kicking off conversations. It really is. Okay, fantastic, thank you. It's just about kicking off conversations about what do we think is happening inside our organisation, inside our unit. What do we think is happening in the world out there? The circles that I move in, online in particular, the future of work, well, what future of work is that? There are many futures of work. Of these things that are happening economically, of these things that are happening demographically, of these things that are happening technologically, the technology, this tsunami of things that are coming at us, which of them are most relevant to your context? So this is really all about helping people to think about their context. And, the changes outside, are all the changes coming at you? Which of them are coming at you? Goodness knows, and what are you going to do about it? So that will be there for exploration at a further date. And the paper that I will write after this, that you'll get a copy of, will have details of what these 10 principles are, and you can see whether you agree with me or not. Okay. This is my final slide, and what I'd like to say is, for me, the beauty, or one of the beauties of social technologies, I was agog 10 years ago. I thought, fantastic. These are the most democratizing technologies. We've got the opportunity to connect with each other. Now, if what I was saying remains still true, that change can happen from passionate, determined people. Now, if these passionate, determined people have got the support inside their organizations, that's brilliant. Often they haven't. So where do they get them from? Outside. The strength of networks that are developing outside your organization, that you can then take the courage back in to do what you want to do. I would love if as many of us as possible could connect. And just this, okay, so that was the published book here. Research-based, it was a prototype. My thinking was not quite formulated then. This one here is an ebook, and I've just revised it. So when I've put the finishing touches to it, you're more than welcome to a copy. But I met the director of workplace innovation at Johnson Controls. I met her at a conference, 2005, 2006. And she's typically French, she's fabulous. Anne-Marie, why don't we set up a network? I said, yeah, that's a great idea. Oh, so we all go to our pals and say, we set up this network for IT, HR, and facilities managers. Because think about it, work is changing so much that the place where we do things, I used to think that Marie and I were on parallel tracks, that she was interested in the built environment, that I was interested in the social architecture, the rules and roles that underpin what we do together. I thought that's what, we were, on different tracks. And then I heard a woman called Judith Hairwagon speak, and she spoke about distributed cognition. She said that the ideas that we have, although they're hidden and half-formed, they are made visible in our work environment. They're in our files, they're in our post-it notes, they're in our scribbles, they're in our diagrams. And suddenly I understood that Marie and I were absolutely talking about the same thing. And it's about how business processes are changing. We were making our thoughts visible through the place where we do things. So finally, what I'd like to say to you is that this little network that we set up, or we started off in 2005, we had our first meeting, we had our final one in 2013. We'll probably resurrect it, but we'd been together for a long time, so we're going in different directions. But essentially what we did was we got bunches of people together, groups of people, and we deliberately chose people who wouldn't normally talk to each other. We deliberately chose people who had a different perspective. And we used to choose a sexy topic. We'd take a theme, we'd give it a title. For example, the 2.0 meme, like the Enterprise 2.0. At the time, we had an architect, Frank Duffy, and we asked him to come and speak about enterprise to zero, or workplace to zero. In other words, do we need an office anymore? Why do we need it? The point I'm trying to get at is that just getting these people together, the energy that we created, the insight that we created, the fun that we created. And, we used to have very, very hard-pressed people like yourselves, saying to Marie and I, have you got the dates in the diary for next year? And we'd say, no. She said, well, get in the diary, because we ring-fence this. This is our time to think. So this is going back to Alberto, making time to reflect, making time to be human, making time to talk to each other, and making time to actually see a particular topic, but looking at it from each other's perspective. And I think that's all I'd like to say to you. My final hope is that we all connect and carry on a conversation. And that's all I'd like to say to you. Thank you.